Hi, Rick Edgeman coming to you from Forte State University. In this presentation, we'll be talking about organizing and relating ideas. And the tools that we'll be looking at in here are affinity diagrams, interrelationship digraphs, and force field analysis. So the word affinity basically means relationship, or that there is something in common among things. And that's what we'll be looking at, is the relationship among things. Now, a first example would be something like this one from Goodyear, and issues surrounding strategic plan. So what would have happened is this, that first the people involved on the team responsible for exploring issues surrounding implementation of the strategic plan would have brainstormed. They would have been sitting around, they probably would have had a facilitator for that brainstorming activity, and they generated a lot of ideas. And so those ideas are sitting there in those boxed statements that are in the middle of this graphic. So we brainstorm a lot of ideas. The next thing that we'd want to know, though, is what are the relationships, if any, among these ideas? And that's what affinity diagrams are intended to sort out. So what would happen is that these would be written out, let's say on 3x5 index cards. Good brainstorming practice would have been that these would have been somewhere between about 3 and 5, 3 and 7 words each per statement. You're going to see that was not enforced necessarily. But what would happen is, again, those would have been written out on Post-it notes. They would have been put in random order on a flat surface. If they were on Post-it notes, then something with a sticky back, then you could post them on a wall or on a white erase board or something like that. And then once they're placed in random order, whether it's this 3x5 index card sitting on a flat surface like a desktop, or a tabletop, or whether there are sticky notes posted on a wall or a white erase board or something of that sort, the job of the team would be to start sorting those. Now, there are particular rules that are usually enforced when you're going through the sorting process. There's no talking in the sorting process. The entire team stands around, excuse me, they stand around, and then what will happen is that somebody will start moving an index card or a sticky note, and they will move it beside some other index card or sticky note that they think, they may not know what precisely, but they think those two things on those two cards or sticky notes have something in common. And the people on the team will be moving those around. And initially what you usually see is initial movement is slow, okay, because there's so much chaos sitting up there when these things are just in random order. But then the pace usually picks up. Sometimes what you'll have is somebody will move a sticky note, somebody else doesn't like it there. They pick it up, they move it somewhere else. It gets moved back, it gets moved somewhere else. It gets moved back, it gets moved somewhere else. It gets moved to a third place. If that continues to happen, oftentimes what that might mean is that that idea actually belongs in two different groupings. Make a duplicate card, put it in each. Duplicate sticky note, put it in each. But eventually what will happen is that you will have groupings. These are called affinity groupings. Groupings that emerge from that sorting process. And it really slows down at the end. And when everybody is just standing around, you know you're pretty much done. Now, there are certain things that could happen. You may have a few singletons out there, just one card, one sticky note. And if so, you need to then start to talk. Remember, you've done all of this in silence thus far. But now you can start to talk. Does that really belong among everything that's there? Or was that something that can just be tossed to the side? It's unimportant relative to the issue that you were brainstorming about, and that you wanted to generate those ideas, but you've been sorting into affinity groupings. Another thing that could happen is that you may have one or a few groups that are very, very, very large. If that happens, usually those would sort into a couple different subgroups. And so what you find here, for example, is if you look at the two columns in black that are leftmost on this slide, those actually started out as a bigger group. The bigger group we decided to label the group could function more effectively, the blue box. And then all of those black ones sorted into things that, well, they did match that idea of the group not could function more effectively, but they sorted into two subgroups, each of which had something a little bit more specific in common. And so the group on the leftmost, you see the very top one, no strong commitment to the group. Well, that would be sort of the subgrouping. And the one beside it, communication issues within the group, that would be the subheading for that group. So oftentimes you'll see these sorts of things, but in the end you have these things sorted out into affinity groupings, meaning that each group has something in common among its members. How do you determine how to describe a given affinity group? Well, the answer oftentimes is that you would look among the various ideas that are expressed in the grouping first. And it could be that one of those ideas captures the essence of what's in common, and we would make that the so-called header cards. Those are the blue ones that you see. So that would be your header card. If not, if you don't find something that captures the essence of the whole group that's already resident in that group, then what you do is you'd have some discussion, and you would identify what in Denmark would be called the red thread, that line of commonality that's running through that group, that thing that describes what the affinity is, what the thing that binds them together is. And you would make a header card out of that so-called red thread, that common idea there. So this is an example of, a real example, of an affinity diagram from Goodyear. There's no magic way to present the affinity. So for example, here's one from a parks group. And you notice that they separated that out. They had a colorful background that I think connotes the idea of a park. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, I encourage creativity when you're using these sorts of things, because I think it stimulates even more of the senses in people who are going to be reading it, rather than being distracted. Here's another one. So this one, I think, raises the idea of the old NBC peacock and what they used, but there you go. Sorted their ideas into 5 specific groupings, affinity groupings, one being respect, one being fundraising, administrative, clients a 4th, inner office considerations a 5th. The issue on this was basically how ethically is a coffee product produced, and how do we determine that? So the company that was examining this issue and the group that was examining this issue, you can see that they sorted, they generated a bunch of ideas first for brainstorming, and afterwards sorted into 4 larger groupings. The environment, quality of life would be the blue one, transparency and traceability of the yellow, and in the purple, economic. But notice that even within each of those 4 areas, that they produced some subgroupings. And so that's what you're seeing there. So those would be good examples of diagrams. Here's one where a couple tools were combined. Fishbone diagrams, brainstorming, and affinity diagrams all in once, where we've talked about brainstorming and fishbone diagrams in other videos that we've made. You can find those on this YouTube channel. Another would be interrelationship digraphs. So interrelationship digraphs are intended to find the relationships among a few ideas, usually somewhere in about the 8 to 15 range. So a few things. But it isn't just the relationships, it's more specifically the cause and effect relationships. And there's a few different ways that this tool can be approached. I'm going to introduce to you the matrix format. So when we look at the matrix format, there are rows and columns. The things that are in the rows are the same as the things that are in the columns. So if you had, let's say, 8 ideas, you would have the same 8 ideas listed as the 8 columns and those same ideas as the 8 rows. And that's an example that I have sitting here. So what you would have here would be something like this. You had, let's say, 8 ideas, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Those are in the rows, those are in the columns. Here's how we proceed. We go across one row at a time. And as we go through, notice that on the diagonal, from upper left to lower right, that those boxes are empty. It's because you're asking questions like, does A cause A? Does B cause B? Does C cause C? Does a thing cause itself? We always leave that box blank. But then as we go across the A row, we're asking the question, does A cause B? And if the answer is no, we leave that box blank. And I can tell you that that box was initially left blank. Does A cause C? If the answer is no, it's initially left blank. If the answer is yes, A causes C, you would have an upward arrow from in that box in the A row C column, indicating that A caused C. So initially that box was left blank. Does A cause D? Yes, A causes D. So you have an upward arrow in that box pointing to D. A causes D. Does A cause E? No relationship. Does A cause F? No relationship. Does A cause G? That was left blank. Does A cause H? That was left blank. So the question is, how did you get those arrows in that first row that point back towards A? The answer is they get filled in at a later time. Okay, and I'll show you how one of those gets filled in now. So you ask the question, we're done with the A row, we move to the B row, and in the B row our first question is, does B cause A? The answer was yes, so we have an upward arrow pointing toward A. And that is the point in time when you go over to the other box, the A row, the B column, and you put in that arrow facing from B to A. So that's what we're doing there. You can see that. Does B cause A? Yes. As soon as we got the yes answer, we came here and filled this one in. Okay, so you would proceed across each row one at a time. And then we keep count of three things: the number of arrows in, the number of arrows out, the total number of arrows. Each of those can be an indicator of sorts. So if you have something that has a lot of in arrows, that means there are a lot of things that can cause it. If you have a lot of in arrows into something, that indicates to you that that could be a potential bottleneck. And we have to be very careful about that. Things need to go right with potential bottlenecks, or you can have work stoppages and things of that sort. You block the flow. On the other hand, if you have a lot of out arrows for something, here's one. Well, here's one with a lot of out arrows, B. 6 out arrows. B causes a lot of things. It may not cause entirely, but it at least partially causes those things. And so when that happens, you're looking at a key enabler. B needs to go right for A, D, E, F, G, and H to go well. So B is a key enabler. If something has a lot of in arrows, as for example D does, then D is a potential roadblock or potential bottleneck. So we look first for a lot of in arrows or a lot of out arrows. But you could also have a fairly even mix but a lot of arrows, in which case something like, well, probably off the screen down at the bottom. But let's say you had a 3-3 mix, 3 in arrows, 3 out arrows. That would be an indicator to you that it causes a lot of things and it's caused by a lot of things. It can be both a bottleneck and a key enabler, whatever that might happen to be. And then we run into force field analysis. And force field analysis works something like this. So usually the way that you can improve something is that you can make a strength stronger or you can diminish the impact of a weakness. And so here's an example where we're trying to develop some software project, some software product. And so the company that's trying to develop this product says, okay, we have some positives going for us. The market really is crying for this product. But the negative is maybe there's a lot of competition out there, and because there's a lot of competition out there, you don't have very much time before you need to launch this product. Next, positive. We have the money. We have the ability to pay a bounty for new software engineering hires. Okay, why is it that we might have to do that in the first place? Well, that's the negative that matches up with that. Because there aren't enough software engineers, talented software engineers out there, so we're going to have to compete for them. Third positive, well, we have the possibility of forming a strong strategic alliance. Okay, and why would you do that in the first place? Probably because you don't have all the capabilities necessary yourself. Okay, that's usually why you do something like that. So we could form a strong strategic alliance. On the other hand, other companies are in similar positions and they might be competing for some of those same partner organizations. Next, positive enabler. We can allocate the budget necessary. But what's the negative that lined up with that? The negative that lined up with that is that there were strong re-engineering rumors. And I can tell you that this is a real effort for a company that you would recognize. And those strong re-engineering rumors actually turned out to be true. That company split into two companies that you probably know each. You may have one of those sitting on your desktop, or it may be a laptop or something like that. That'll give you some sort of a hint as to the company. And then a fifth positive, we have motivated senior management, but the negative was they were motivated senior management, but they weren't particularly good at planning. Okay, so in force field analysis, usually what you try and do is identify your strengths and identify the things that are in opposition to those. You become better or more capable of succeeding with whatever it is that you're doing by either improving the strength of one of those strengths and eliminating or at least weakening the ability of any of those weaknesses to impair your progress. So that's force field analysis. It's actually an adaptation of something from a learning theorist named Kurt Lewin, Lewin. Not somebody who developed it as a quality tool, but an adaptation of something that he developed for some other purpose. So those are just some of the tools that are out there for you, some of the techniques that are out there for organizing and relating ideas. So something like affinity diagrams would organize those and find relationships among the groups, but not necessarily among ideas and groups, but not necessarily cause and effect relationships. Cause and effect relationships, that's the interrelationship digraph. But then force field analysis allows you to go through a relative assessment of strengths and weaknesses of things that are in direct opposition to one another. So that's more or less the content of this presentation, and we'll cover other ideas, maybe how to prioritize and deploy ideas in another presentation. Thank you.